Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Harris. I'm the International Education Lead at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And I'm delighted and honoured to be able to speak to you today about green and sustainable development. So let's get straight into some key points on this important area. We're going to reflect on some global issues and then perhaps ask some challenging questions at the end about the China context. But importantly, the green scene is something that's really the bedrock. It's a continual thread through the world of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. As CILT International, we've been very busy focusing on sustainability and covering the global picture of this important agenda item. We've been busy influencing policy, and particularly in the UK, there's been some work going on looking at decarbonisation of transport, and our policy groups have been busy articulating the Institute's views. There's also the corporate social responsibility of gender, of course, and actually as individual organisations, whether we're macro or micro, we all have a responsibility to the planet. Let's not forget that in developing zero carbon approach to transport, it's not just about the vehicles, but it's about smart data and smart intelligence and whether we've actually got our finger on the pulse of monitoring effectively. And finally, it comes down to us as consumers, doesn't it? How we decide to move around, whether it's by bicycle, by train, by e-bike, by electric car. So the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport has a real global function in raising awareness of these issues, adding to the debate, and in particular providing evidence that allows us as professionals to make informed decisions. Now let me pick up on that. The informed decision-making part is a really important ingredient of who we are. And here's just some examples. In the UK during 2020 and the early part of 2021, there's been a real focus on routes to net zero. So with COP26 coming up imminently, and the fact that the transport sector accounts for so much carbon, it's vital that we think about how we transform. So there's a big debate going on in the UK at the moment about rail decarbonisation and how we use innovation and technology to achieve that. There's also environmental reform, and we're looking at the issues of accessibility in rural areas and making sure that the carbon agenda isn't just a city one, but it's also one that can be owned and supported out in provincial areas. Now let's remember the UN goals of sustainability. And it's really easy for us to think of green equals planet. But of course, the other two dimensions of people and economic balance are really, really important too. Yes, we can achieve a green planet perhaps by introducing some very strong regulation or some very clear directives to industry or to the transport sector. But how you deliver it and how you convince people to buy into this is equally as important. So the how to sustainability is just as important as what you seek to do. And that involves really listening and engaging with stakeholders and with people. Now, if we stay with the big picture issues, one key message that's linked to those UN Sustainable Development Goals is to listen, listen, and listen, and make sure that there is ongoing consultation so that your stakeholders, whether it's shareholders, whether it's business leaders, whether it's the public, actually understand what that carbon agenda looks like personally for them. Now, CILT International has carried out some key insight research. More of this is actually available through our website and our bulletins, but the UN Sustainable Goals is a really good place to start. And this map shows where we actually have CILT activity going on in the world, where we have branches vocalizing these issues, but also where they're at in terms of signing up to the Paris Agreement. And you can see there's a lot of correlation here. If we move to some other indicators, it's also important to recognize the difference between employment and unemployment rates. And our research, again, looked at whether or not the goals were being achieved in those countries or whether there was a real call to action for CILT to have a voice in that area. And equally, it applies with the difference between countries that are above or below a poverty line. And again, you can see the relationship here around the percentage of the population of CILT countries that have a poverty issue versus the logistics performance index here on the right of your screen. Again, the logistics industry has a real part to play in terms of social equity and balance. And finally, well-being. We talk about cities and whether cities are lovely places to live and places we want to bring up our children. Again, the CILT research paints a picture there about looking at some of the indicators around health and well-being and how logistics either helps or hinders that. Some food for thought for everyone there. Now, if we turn to some other indicators, corporate social responsibility is none. Here's an example from DHL of their CSR global approach. Every major company, and indeed even smaller companies, have got a real heart for this. And by using the CSR tool, I think there's a real opportunity for us to start really further greening our supply chains, making sure that all of the processes that are put in place internally, as well as outward facing, really do match up to sustainability commitments. If we go to some more detailed expressions of this, what about last mile planning? So how we use our urban road networks more effectively at the beginning, at the end of the day, to make sure goods actually get to where it needs to get to, but without compacting and really putting pressure on individual roads and routes within cities. This is an example of the quiet deliveries guidance produced by the Department of Transport, which I was involved in writing. And this guidance looks at this whole issue from different viewpoints, from the consumer, from the retailer, from the freight operator, from the third-party logistics provider, and say, we're all after the same thing, which is an effective first and last mile delivery system that actually does reduce that carbon footprint. Now, there's also a role for logisticians, transport professions, and supply chain experts to be a part of the forward thinking. And here's just an example of the Philippines National Urban Mobility Plan, adopted in 2020. Again, this is one I had personal experience of writing, and we built in here the importance of skills and training and development, and making sure that the professionals of the future in the Philippines really understood what it means to have a sustainable urban mobility plan working for the main islands and the satellite islands that make up the Philippines. Clearly, maritime movement, city deliveries, and sustainability are really important themes within this NUMP document. Again, this is available if you want to go and have a look in a bit more detail online. Now, one of our big themes in CILT at the moment is digital transformation, and the digitalization theme is being broadcast right the way up to Christmas as a key thing that we want our members to be aware of and we want them to be on top of. However, there's some real challenges around digitalization at the moment, because it's not just about digitalizing something that's already there or automating something. There's a real challenge to actually think about the social impacts of what you're doing, whether the assets that are there are actually the right assets, and whether retrofitting environmental improvements to those assets is the right thing to do, or whether there's a more fundamental change. There's also the issue around customer service, that digital is great, but actually if me as an individual doesn't see a change in how things are working or the carbon footprint of a service I'm enjoying, how is that real? So it's really important that the digitalization agenda and the sustainability agenda work together hand in hand. Now, it would be very wrong of me not to mention the whole agenda of skills and capacity building. So there's been a lot of work done around the skill gaps and whether actually, here we are in 2021, do we actually have those skills in the right amount and in the right place to really tackle the carbon agenda? So this journey really started back in around 2017 with the World Bank report looking at logistics skills and competencies globally, This gave a real challenge, really. In emerging countries, the shortage was at manager and leader level. In developing countries, the skills shortage was at the operational level. Big message is that there wasn't enough of the right people in the right place to have the impact that we need. Now, if we fast forward to what is happening this year, CILT has been involved globally with a number of skills development projects. For example, we've worked with the High Volume Transport Project in Africa to look at the impacts of COVID. And through working with HVT, we've been able to work with a number of consultancies and other project leaders to really start to tackle climate change, inclusion, social reform, and how those things all mesh together. So without this skills development and capacity building going on, whatever new technologies come forward, whatever new green thinking happens, you've got to have these skilled people in order to really pioneer it into the future. So let's bring this back to China. Here's just some thoughts for you to reflect on within the forum. Where does the funding come from? Is it private sector? Is it public sector? Is it a different mechanism? How do we bring cross-sector efficiencies between, for example, the rail sector, the maritime sector, education sector, and make sure that the solutions are not chasing each other around the country? It's almost a single formula that everyone understands. What happens around carbon technology advancement within manufacturing? What about your carbon capture schemes? Are those going to become run of the mill? Are they going to become, the main mechanism? Or do we also have to look at the role of small, medium enterprises that can actually access this carbon saving thinking? And of course, what about the role of professional development? Without the learning and sharing and accelerating that agenda, how are we going to equip our youth, our creative thinkers of the future, to actually roll forward that essential carbon agenda? Ultimately, it comes down to personal choice. For those of you attending the forum, many of you may be coming in online, but think about your daily profile, your daily going about your business. Has that gone through transformation? Has that gone through personal mode shift away from, example, single occupancy car use? That's just some insights from myself, just to set some challenges for this forum. And we hope that you can take some of those global messages and also apply some of the thinking across to the very current and emerging priorities for China. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the forum.